This is Sharon Cooper, and I am interviewing Dale Anderson in Omaha, Nebraska for the Nebraska Vietnam Veterans Memorial Foundation. Okay, Dale?
Good morning, everyone. Everyone will be, who's watching this interview after they do the production and have it on file, which probably will include mostly relatives or friends. But anyway, as Sharon said, I'm Dale Anderson, born and raised in Omaha, Nebraska, and a Navy veteran serving on active duty with the Navy Seabees, the construction version of the Navy. I went into the service in actually 1962 as a reservist while attending the University of Nebraska. And during that time, a roommate of mine in 1965 actually came back from class one day and says, "I just joined the Navy Reserve here in Lincoln with the Seabees." Now this person actually was taking engineering at the university, and he had plans to, after graduation, to apply to see if he might be able to go to Officer Candidate School and become a engineer with the Navy. I was not in engineering school, so that was not an option, but I heard with interest about him joining the Seabees. I hadn't thought about what I was going to do or not do. But just prior to that, other people who had already graduated or had not gone to school, of course, the draft was still going on. And if you wanted to pick your service, so to speak, you had to initiate something, because if you got drafted, it was all Army at that time that were taking draftees. But I had a family background with a cousin and a couple other shirt-tail relations, I'll call them, that were also in the Seabees in World War II. So that intrigued me to the point that a few weeks later I decided to do the same thing my roommate did, and because I knew that once I graduated from the university that I would be going into the service. And so I enlisted at the Reserve Center in Lincoln, and then where you could go on active duty after you graduated. So that was the program they had at that time. So the time I graduated, which was at midterm 1965, mid-year, February, graduation consisted of my parents were there and an uncle. And the very next day I had my orders to fly to Treasure Island, California, which was the Navy processing center for anybody going on active duty as to where they would be sent to from there. I'd already had boot camp during the summer of 1962, so it was that I was going to go into boot camp. That had already occurred. So I'm at Treasure Island for a couple of weeks, being a non-rated person, as they say, a pay grade of E3. You were assigned to various duties, however they, needed people doing different projects around the base. And I had the distinction of being able to mow the lawn at retired Admiral Nimitz's home. He lived on Treasure Island at that time. I don't know how that worked, but that was the program they had. And so I never did see him, but I did see his lawnmower and of course the lawn. From there, I was assigned to MCB 3 on Guam, and the slogan for Guam at that time, maybe still is, Guam is good. So upon arrival in Guam, we're taking a Navy bus from Andersen Air Force Base, which is on the other end of the island, to the Navy base, which is the other extreme end of the island, where the APRA harbor is located. So during that little brief bus excursion, we go through the downtown area of Guam. Guam at this time is still probably pretty much what it looked like even during World War II and when the Japanese occupied it. The tallest building in town was 2 stories. And on top of this 2-story building, as we're driving along on the bus, is a giant sign. And there's an insurance agent's sign. He's very proud of this. And the sign on top of the building says Mutual of Omaha. And I thought, gee, all the way across the world, to see a Mutual of Omaha sign. And of course, I had just left Omaha just a few weeks prior to that. Anyway, on Guam for about 2 months, and at that time I was working as a yeoman, because when I checked in to actually it was going to be an engineering aide in the Seabees, because I had a couple of years at college before I changed what I wanted to specialize in. I started out in engineering and then ended up graduating with a degree in arts and science. The engineering courses were a little more than what I normally couldn't handle it that well. So anyway, as I checked in, at that time, of course, that's pre-computers and all this sort of thing, but I could type. And the chief in the admin office saw on my documents that I had typing skills, and so he thought, yeah, he had a live one that he could recruit into his office. And so I took him up on it, and so I worked in administration while on Guam, and the battalion was scheduled to rotate back to the United States in about 3 months. Typically a Seabee battalion will go overseas. Mobile, it's in their name, Mobile Construction Battalion. What that means is they go overseas for 6 to 8 months, rotate back to the United States 6 to 8 months, back over to another location 6 to 8 months. It's just a continuum which still goes on to today. It's just the way they operate. So I'm on duty over the weekend at this particular time after being there a couple of weeks, and go down to pick up message traffic from the States or from headquarters. And of course, what am I going to do when I get messages? I'm going to read them. And so I'm sitting there in the Jeep, and I'm reading the message about the fact that the battalion is not going to be rotating back to the United States in 3 months, but instead within 2 to 3 weeks, we are going to be headed to Vietnam. I didn't even know where Vietnam was. I'd never even heard of it. But that was in the message, and the reason that we were scheduled to go to Vietnam was because we were the closest battalion that had full complement of all our equipment. There was no one closer unless you got to, I think maybe, well, yeah, obviously the West Coast of the United States. There might have been a battalion in Hawaii, I'm not sure. But we were the closest one that had our equipment. So plans got changed, and like I say, around the 3-month mark, we head out on a LSD, landing ship dock, with our equipment and our men. Battalion complement at that time was probably about 500-600, because it was still peacetime, so to speak. That changed, and complement within a year we were about 800. But anyway, we transited from Guam to Vietnam. It's a 9-day passage through the Philippine Islands and then into Vietnam. This was now March of 1965. We were the second battalion to arrive in country. The first one was MCB 10, but we were the first to arrive in 1965 at Da Nang in the northern part of Vietnam. And we were there until approximately September, as I recall. But going into Vietnam, we offloaded in the harbor at Da Nang and proceeded to head to our assigned area, which was a location called Hill 327. Everything is named by hill numbers. And we were located, I'm going to guess we're about 10 miles or so west of the city of Da Nang, and between us and the city was the airport where the U.S. Air Force was located. But to get to our base camp, we left, I think it was a late afternoon, and approximately 45 minutes or so after we left, the whole column of us stopped, and I'm riding in the back of a weapons carrier, which is covered with, the canvas tarp over the back of it, and all you can do is see out the back. And we stop, and of course we don't know why. And a chief comes marching along to everybody in our whole column, and comes up to us and says, "All right, everyone, everybody lock and load. We're about to go through no man's land." And there's another Seabee right across from me. We're facing each other, and his eyes got about the size of silver dollars, I think, which didn't make me feel too happy either. He is just, and the sweat is rolling down. He says, "What does he mean, lock and load?" Well, no man's land meant that we didn't own it, and the Vietnamese didn't own it, and the Viet Cong didn't own it. It was anybody's game. It could be day or night. Typically, most kind of situations at daytime, it was friendly, but by the time dusk and the nightfall came along, anything could happen, and apparently had happened there. So that was kind of the rude awakening, just to not that many hours in country and find out that's what's going on. So we get to the base camp, and now it's very dark. Nightfall has occurred, and there's no sun, or no moon, I should say, and we're ready to be assigned to our tents. Well, it was too late to do that. They decided, and it's too dark to try and figure out what to do, so they had just one main large tent. Not which I should say one, but there was one for our headquarters company personnel. There was, I don't know, 20, 25 of us. And they said, just take your bag and use that as a pillow or something. You can just sleep there till dawn. So we're in there, can't see anything. And I don't think it was an hour, and all of a sudden it sounded like, I mean, everything was exploding everywhere. It had no idea what was going on. Well, come to find out, again, a chief came by to explain what was happening. He says, we are camped next to a Marine howitzer company, and they're now projecting to a target somewhere west of us here, and just bear with it. When it quits, try and get some sleep. So that was the second thing. And of course, this is our first day in country. We thought, well, this looks like a very interesting next 6 to 8 months. So anyway, that's what occurred there. The Seabees build infrastructure while they're in country. We were there in Da Nang working on potable water programs for the Vietnamese surrounding the city of Da Nang. Trying to do repair roads which had been could be used for American equipment, projects at the air base also, and I guess it was kind of a standing explanation. Sometimes people don't understand what the Seabees do. It's I call it a Peter Kiewit construction company in uniform. It's same kind of thing. We're not building skyscrapers. We're heavily involved in mostly regular infrastructure kind of projects, roads, smaller buildings, that kind of thing. So at the end of about September, we rotate back to the United States until at that time we come back, and then there are ongoing classes. There's a 2-week period of time where we go up to Camp Pendleton to exercise with the Marines for defensive battle tactics. The Seabees are a defensive type of organization, but not offensive. But the defensive purposes, you're supposed to defend yourself. And so we work in coordination quite closely with the Marine Corps in that case. So. And other various types of schools, specialized schools that people have to go to for builders, utilities, electricians, that kind of thing. Then we go back again in 1966, again March time frame through I think it was October, November, when we finally all came back to United States. Second assignment was to Chulai, Chulai, which was south of Da Nang in mileage, maybe 60 miles or so. Excuse me. And down there, our assignment is to work on putting down metal mats for a temporary marine air landing strip. Also building a hospital, marine hospital, which was right offshore, and some various other smaller projects. But it was mainly to put up facilities for the 1st Marine Division headquarters office also was down there. So that's what our duties were at July. Whereas Da Nang is a city of I don't know how many, maybe 150,000 then, I'm not sure. Quite a good size city. And July, on the other hand, was just remote. There was no nearby village at all, but there were harbor facilities there where LSTs could come in that were hauling equipment. Actually, the LST equipment coming in were LSTs that they were given to the Japanese government, and the Japanese were bringing supplies in for us. So July, that was the mission there. One of the things that July, and this is typically what kind of work shifts were, you start at 6 in the morning, 12-hour day, but there was somewhere around 2 o'clock or so, 1 to 2 o'clock was lunch break. And I seem to think, I don't recall exactly, that it was maybe an hour and 15 minutes or so, quite leisurely, but the whole idea was because you're going to still be putting in I don't know, approximately 10-hour day or so. So one of those times, my best friend at that time with the Seabees, Walt Jennings, great guy from Indiana, we strolled down to the beach area to see what kind of facilities were going on down there, just to check things out. And we noticed a strange-looking boat, Navy boat, turned out to be a Navy Swift boat. So we were talking to some of the crew about what kind of things they did. They explained the purpose of Swift boats were patrolling the coast. In this case, they also did some patrolling in some of the rivers. They didn't go far in country like the PBRs did. They stayed mainly on the ocean side along shore. But doing the same thing, daily tasks were stopping and checking Vietnamese fishing boats and equivalent of like a sampans. Some were quite good size. Some had crew of you could see anywhere from 3 to 8 people, depending on the size of the vessel. But again, checking for potential Viet Cong infiltration. So it was just a ongoing process of checking those kind of fishing craft. And Walt and I just thought, well, that's interesting. And then one of the Swift boat sailors said, well, I don't know if he was just teasing or what. He said, you know, if you're interested, you know, you ought to go out with us sometime. We can always use an extra weapon on board. And we thought, well, sure, yuck, you know. And then the officer in charge of the craft, they were typically an ensign or a lieutenant JG, came out of the cabin there, and they made the same comment. And he said, well, we're going to go out, I don't know, whatever day it was. It'll be, because we mentioned we had a day off was coming up within the next 4 or 5 days or something, 2 days off kind of thing. And he said, well, if it'd be the right timing, he says, you could come down here. He says, we leave, I'm going to make up a number, like 6 o'clock at night, whatever, and we return the next morning, I don't know, 10 in the morning or something. It's a nighttime operation this time. So Walt and I got intrigued by this, and we decided, yeah, we'd do that. You know, that's how smart we were. Yeah, we'd do that. So we did. And we did that a couple of times. We found it fascinating that we didn't incur any problems. That's how ignorant we were of the fact, because we found out later on that that's number of regular swift boat sailors, the swift boat operation in general. There was only a total of about 3,000 swift boat sailors over a approximately 5-6 year period. Swift boats were not used after the war, and they were not used before the war. They were invented to use during the Vietnam War only. They turned out to be an impressive looking craft, but noisy, no stealth about them at all, but that's just what the way it was. And of course they lost pretty good percentage of their own sailors during that process. But anyway, Walt and I probably would have done that more than the few times that we had a chance, but someone found out, or we made a wrong comment, whatever, back at our battalion, and our commanding officer found out. And called Walt and I into the office, his office, and he was just ballistic as to why we were doing this, how dumb it was. It's not our mission. You're not assigned to them. Anyway, that ended our swift boat experiences, and probably smart. But so we rotate back. Walt and I were on the same advance party to come back to the United States. Advance party, which was about 1 month before the rest of the battalion came back. Advance party goes back, and they help transition from the battalion that's going to be replacing you with procedures to, or they can close out their operation and you start to move in and what you need to do to help that cause. So we transition back and land at the air base near Port Hueneme. Port Hueneme is north of Los Angeles. That's the the Seabee base in California. we get back early evening, as I recall. But as we're getting ready to depart the plane, a lieutenant approaches the plane and comes up to the entrance before we get off and announces that we should proceed directly back to the base. I mean, when we were landing, we had an opportunity to 24 hours or whatever it was before we'd have to report for duty back at the base. But we were that close to Los Angeles, and he's letting everybody know to avoid trying to go to Los Angeles. And we thought, what is this all about? And he goes on to explain about rioting and buildings torched and people getting injured, and just it sounded like its own war. And we're just looking at each other dumbfounded. As it turns out, this was the original Watts riots that were occurring. There were a large swath of neighborhood in the Watts area in Los Angeles was in a riot situation. And we thought, well, you know, this is like, we just came from an unfriendly area, and we come back home, and this is what we're running into. And this was, you know, very stark. It was hard to adjust to. Anyway, after my service, active duty service ended, I still had some reserve time left, and I came back then and reaffiliated with the Seabee Battalion, not in Lincoln, but back where I'm from, in Omaha. And finished out my enlistment there, and thought, well, that's the end. I'm not going. My military period is over. During this time, after I'm out of the service, another friend of mine who is a Navy drilling reservist and an officer gives me a call, and he says, how'd you like to come back in the Navy? We're trying to, they're in a campaign of trying to build up their numbers. And he says, Dale, he says, you can come back in for just 1 year. You don't have to enlist for more than a year. And if you don't like it, you can forget it, you know, but you can stand on your head for a year. And he says, plus you owe me because you talked me into coming back in the reserves, 3 years ago or whatever. And we kind of joked about that. So I said, okay, Fred, I'll think about it. And a few days later I called and I said, okay, I'll come back for a year. Well, as it turned out, the year expanded, and I ended up serving and retiring after 30 years. So, and I'm very happy, proud, and that I did, and I can't say enough for the military life that I had, and appreciation for what they do, and the kind of people they are just in general. And of course Fred for talking me into coming back in for a 1 year period that turned out to be 30. During that time in the reserves, with the Navy anyway, you have opportunities to, as the old slogan used to be, see the world. We had various 2-week assignments, of course, not only to Seabee base in the United States, but I had a period where I was not in the Seabees, that I was on the fleet side, because at that time I was a yeoman or a petty officer, and had opportunities to get overseas, to Thailand for an exercise in Thailand. That's 17 days. During my time on the fleet side, I also became chief petty officer after a number of years, and I applied and was fortunate to become a chief warrant officer when I retired as a CWO4. And at that time then had assignments to Scotland and England, and on numerous occasions, so got to go back and forth, and happy for that kind of a thing too. And various bases around the country, both East and West Coast. So can't say again, appreciation of the armed forces in the United States.
Dale, you talked about that you mowed grass for Admiral Nimitz, but what else, when you go into the Seabees, are you given as training?
Well, that's because I was what they call a non-rate at that time. I had not made the rate. I was in training to become an engineering aide, which, as I explained, did not end up staying in that position.
Mm-hmm.
But what happens is you end up going to a formal school. There would be A school, B schools, A school, or C schools, but so the engineering aid are like surveyors, draftsmen, part of engineering aid duty. You have construction electricians, you have carpenters, which are called builders within the Navy Seabees, mechanics, construction mechanic, steel workers, all extensive schooling. Which those assets are very valuable when that person gets out of the service. If they don't stay in the active duty, they are valued people in civilian life with construction companies, of course, small and large. At that time, I had not had any formal schooling because I was only doing weekend drills while I'm at the university. I'm just going, weekend drills at the Navy Reserve Center in Lincoln. So, and of course, the idea that the conflict broke out in Vietnam. It might have been different if that didn't happen. It would have gone back to Port Hueneme, and they probably would have gotten a schooling for me at that time, but that didn't happen. So that's when, like I say, when they transition every 6 to 8 months, unless it's a school that is longer than that, then you're released from the battalion to go to that school, and then you come back. But I did not have it. The only skill I could perform for 2 weeks at Treasure Island, of course, was cutting grass.
Did you leave in the middle of your college and go back after you?
No, see, that was the advantage. I could join the reserves and not go on active duty until after I graduated.
Oh, okay.
So I enlisted in 1962. Went in May, I think it was, and then I went to boot camp that summer, the Great Lakes, and then came back and resumed school again. and did 2-week training in the summers until I graduated. And like I say, I graduated mid-year of 1965, then immediately went on active duty. So.
Right. And then you stayed and had enough years for retirement. And when did you retire?
1996 I retired. 1 October of 1996. So I had a 3-year break. I think it was 3-year break from when I finished my first enlistment and to when I reaffiliated back into the reserves.
So that kind of took you back to civilian life, that reserves, because you were doing something else at the same time. You had a civilian job then, in addition to being in the reserves?
You mean when I came back?
Mm-hmm.
Oh yes, I mean school was over, so I became a securities broker actually in Omaha until 1974, and there was a big market crash of 1974, similar to what we had in 2008. And I worked, I shouldn't say for the same company, it was sort of the same company, but they got bought out, not once but twice. That the second one got bought out or merged or whatever because things were financially stressful for them also because of the way the market was going then. Actually then I transitioned out of the investment business, security investment business, and went into other positions, sales and sales management, until I retired and age 65 many years later. So.
You mentioned Walt Jennings. Are you still in contact with him?
Yes, my friend Walt Jennings, best man at his wedding in Indiana, but then he and his wife moved to Arizona. I stayed in Omaha. We had a period where we drifted apart. I guess families become busy and things happen, and then some years later we reunited. I had never been to Florida, but we ended up, my wife and I went to Florida and stayed with some other friends, and it was very close to where Walt was, and I ran him down, and we reunited, and now we're in constant contact with each other after all these years. Great guy, and you never lose that kind of friendship, and it helps keep life going in a meaningful way when you've got good friends. No matter how long the absence, if you got a good friend, that good friend is still there.
The Seabee unit that you were assigned to, the battalion, do they have reunions, and have you attended any of them?
The MCB3 has its own reunion every year. They rotate around the country. I have not been to one. I was scheduled to go to one. I'm trying to remember if it was 2020 or 2021, and it was postponed because of COVID for 2 years in a row. They're going to, I'm sure they're talking about having, reviving, but that's what happened anyway in that case. And so hope to. I haven't been to one, but and but there's just some other kind of reunions. The Seabee battalion that the reserves are affiliated with here in Omaha. Um, uh, we have, I don't want to call them reunions, but I guess it is. It's annual affair there that happens. It rotates around the Midwest at various locations, and I do participate in that.
Are you a member of any veterans organizations?
Yes, American Legion, VFW, Reserve Organization, ROA, Reserve Organization of America, MOA, Military Officers Association, Swift Boat Sailors Association, and Fleet Reserve, from when I first joined as an enlisted person. And so yes, and also it's not a veteran organization. It's a veteran service organization, the Navy League, and also involved with the USS Nebraska, the submarine, the SSBN 739 is a ballistic submarine, and been co-chairman of that group since it was founded in 1993. So it'll be 30 years next year, or a 30-year reunion. We bring back crew members, 6 crew members, twice a year to the state of Nebraska, and go to such functions as Nebraska Land Days during Buffalo Bill Rodeo, which is in June, College World Series. The night before they go back, we go to the Lake Manawa Sailing Association for outdoor barbecue, and of course this is the public's invited to all these kinds of events. September, normally get invited to go to a Husker football game, attend 3 days with Apple Fest in Nebraska City. In Nebraska City and North Platte, the crew stay with host families, one sailor per family, and just grand experience for the community and for the sailors. And like I say, we've been doing this for 30 years come next year. Also involved with the USS Omaha LCS 12, which was commissioned in 2018, and we now, through the Navy League, we bring back 6 sailors for that ship also. And of course, they, being Omaha oriented, they stay mostly for their activities in Omaha, but they do attend jointly the Husker game with the Nebraska crew. And great relationships, great community response, and also with the crew, we try and get them in to visit with schools, grade and or high school level, and in the past have had the occasion to go to like Children's Hospital, visit the wards, in the same outstate, in Kearney and or North Platte. So and that's an ongoing, as long as the ships are in the water, we'll hopefully still have those kind of things going forward. Of note, the USS Nebraska submarine, once it becomes decommissioned, which will be supposedly 2042, the sail, as they call it, a portion of the ship, at some point will be put on a platform to make it look like the hull, and the ship's actually in the water, down at Carter Lake across from Hepley Airfield. Currently, there's a pad down there for the USS Omaha submarine, which the sail actually is in Omaha and being refurbished to be put on display down there. And that's in coordination with the City Parks and Recreation Department, which we are working jointly with on that project.
Okay, is there a message that you'd like to leave for future generations who will view or hear this interview? I'm sure it's going to be more than just your family.
A message. I think it goes without saying, one of the strengths to the United States is the bond between its military service people and the public. It's a very strong bond, and I think as long as that bond exists, we'll always have a strong military and a strong public awareness and a strong public attitude. Jointly working together is one of the key factors in why the United States is the best country in the world as far as I'm concerned.
I agree.
Thank you.
Have you shared your experiences in the military with your family?
Yes, I have. It's not forced. It's if the question comes up, I'm happy to discuss, but I never initiate it. I would say it's wrong or right. I just that's the way it is. Normally, like today, to come down and have this opportunity. I didn't make a big deal about that.
Okay. Is there anything that we didn't cover or that you'd like to go back and say more about that you were reminded of while you were talking?
That's one of those questions that I'll probably think of after I leave. It might be at 3 in the morning. I go, oh, why didn't I? But I'm just appreciative of the time that I have been allocated and the opportunity to tell my story of my experience with the United States Navy.
All right, since I can't remember whether I said the date, I'm going to say it now. This interview is being conducted on April 22nd, 2022.